So let it begin right here, right now. Earth Revolution.
Hey everybody, welcome to Earth Revolution 2014, still the home of the green scene here in Nashville, Tennessee. I am your host, Susan Shan. This is part 2 of the Tennessee Local Food Summit 2013, in which we are hearing from Ken Meador. Ken was the keynote speaker for this event, and he is also president of the Crossroads Resource Center in Minneapolis. In this show, he's giving more concrete examples of what others are doing to build and maintain a healthy local food system, ideas that we can learn from in Middle Tennessee as we seek to do the same. From South Carolina to Illinois, Wisconsin to Arizona, people are coming together around one of the most important issues of our day. So where do the ingredients for your next meal come from? Wouldn't it be nice if you could answer that question with the names of people you know and trust? We can get there from here. Let's find out how.
Now a few economic highlights from the South Carolina story. And this is just sales data. This doesn't talk about profitability, but this is the chart since 1924 of all the money farmers have earned selling cotton and tobacco. And as you can see, cotton was very, very big in the 1940s. This is I should add, this is adjusted for inflation. So the dollars from 1924 are like worth $16 today. We've had that much erosion in the value of the dollar. So a dollar in 1924 goes a lot longer in this chart than it does in current dollars. But you see how that peaked in about 1962 and is not coming back. We have some Middle Eastern companies investing in Mississippi farmland. They can corner cotton production there. There may be some people trying to buy up land in South Carolina for the same reason, but the profits for South Carolina farmers don't seem to be returning. Tobacco, of course, we've had lots of reasons to raise less tobacco. There's still some tobacco being raised in South Carolina, but you see that production curve rise in the 40s and then fall in the 80s. On the same scale, look at the major cash grains in South Carolina. Very little soybeans, a little bit more corn than when the price was higher, but going down as the price falls down. A little bump in wheat, mostly because we were trading wheat to Russia in 1973 after the OPEC energy crisis. And that peaked and has fallen back down. So a lot of arable cropland that's going to grains, but not much income for farmers. And I would challenge you to show me in this chart how grain farming has become more sustainable in the last 80 years. Can you show that to me on this chart? And this is one of the major industries of the state. Fruit and vegetable sales. South Carolina is a major exporter of tomatoes and a major exporter of peaches, all up and down the eastern seaboard, and they're a major importer of peaches and tomatoes from Florida. And the amount of money earned by those farmers is actually relatively small. It's been steady over time, which I think is a very good development. A lot of farmers raising hundreds of acres of vegetables for sales, fresh vegetables for sale in a freezing packing plant. But again, you don't see a sustained growth in vegetable production in a state that has very rich resources and a lot of infrastructure geared that way. It just is not there. We're looking at livestock. We finally see a success story in some respects. Not totally a success story, but look at the dairy industry declining drastically since 1976, the white line. Cattle and calves declining since about the same time, as the margins for raising cattle have been diminishing, mostly because of feedlot production that's lowering the margin to where individual farmers can't afford to raise it. Similar story for hogs. The only real rising force in agriculture in South Carolina is the poultry industry, selling about $1.2 billion worth of chickens, all of which are exported out of the state, essentially. Or they go into a commodity stream and they come back as frozen or whatever processed chickens that have no identity for South Carolina, so you don't know where they came from. So that's the rising force in agriculture, confined chickens. It's not my favorite way to eat chicken, but it's also an important part of the industry in terms of how farmers who want to stay in their land have found some purchase for doing that. And we all know the situation with confined animals and the frustrations growers have with that process, but that's an economic reality today. Meanwhile, the number of farms in the state has plummeted since 1949, and it's held steady since the 1970s or so, but remarkable diminishment of the population in the countryside, the chance for people to pay taxes to support schools, and again, that crucible where people learn how to work hard and learn how to have family values in a farm setting really just diminishing over time. So with those facts in mind, and I have a 150-page document you can download from my website if you want to learn more facts and figures, but the summation of all that was we started talking about what do we do now? Where do we go next? And these are the key elements of the plan that we presented to the state of South Carolina that got announced on December 4th that hopefully they will embrace wholeheartedly and really invest in. But the first thing we said is there's a certified South Carolina grown program that's really robust. Everybody, the growers like it, a lot of consumers like it, the state's very proud of what it's done, and they would say it has had a $23 million positive impact on the state economy. But I also talked to farmers who said, if we don't clean up this program, it's going to be trouble, because I'm putting my produce out there under the certified South Carolina grown label, and the market has right next to me Florida produce and Georgia produce, and people don't know where it's coming from. So our suggestion was that basically to elevate the integrity of that certified South Carolina program, an existing program, we needed to make sure that every consumer knew the farm, the name of the farm where that produce was grown. And what I'm basically saying is if you go to the farmer's market, or there's a lot of roadside stands in South Carolina, if you honestly know the farm where that was produced, then you know you're buying Florida produce. You know you're buying from Georgia, and you can make that choice. But if you want to choose South Carolina, you also know the name of the farm. So you actually could call up the farmer. You could visit the farm and have a relationship there. And if you choose to do that, you've got the means to do it. The state's role is to basically make sure that process has integrity, and then it's up to consumers to really be loyal to local products. Part of that process of getting consumers to be loyal is to market the concept of local food and its relationship to health to customers. And here we came up with, I think, could be a very exciting public relations campaign, and it's modeled after one that was started in southwest Colorado in one single county. I did a study for Montezuma County that I presented in March, and the folks there heard me speak, and they said, you know, we need a campaign we're going to call Eat 5, Buy 5. And the idea was everybody should eat 5 fruits and vegetables daily for health reasons, because that's the minimum amount health experts recommend for being healthy and avoiding cancer. And everyone should buy $5 of food directly from a farm somewhere in our region. Montezuma County started that campaign with a $500 investment, and they created this poster, which basically says, Eat 5, Buy 5, and here's the $2 million impact that'll have in our county if you do that. South Carolina looked at that and said, could we do that in South Carolina as well? And we have the statewide public relations firm that's one of the most advanced firms in the country now wrestling with how to create a campaign like that and how to balance that marketing with enough productive capacity that if you market local foods, those foods are there to buy. But I think this is something that could go very viral, because there's some people in Maine doing this without even talking to me. It's something that people understand intuitively. It's a very simple message to get across. And I think this is a very effective way to focus on the connection between food and health in a very elegant and pretty concise way. So we suggested the state spend actually $2 million on this marketing effort to really promote local foods, as long as they balance that with the actual production side as well. And then, as I said before, during lunchtime, we calculated what would happen if every resident of the state bought $5 worth of food directly from a local farm. And that would create $1.2 billion of new revenue for farmers, a 46% increase in farm revenue. And $5 a week seems like a very simple act, but it's not easy right now because most people don't have access to a farmer to buy food from. We need to build connecting infrastructure that makes that an easier process, a more efficient and a cheaper process for everybody concerned. But if we could do that, we would have sales rivaling the entire poultry industry today, which is the only rising force in agriculture. And I think that number really hit home with a lot of policymakers in South Carolina. They had been dismissing food. One economic developer I talked to said, local food's nice, it's small potatoes. His word. That developer is not from South Carolina, but he lost his job a year later because his neighbors were telling him he should invest in local food, and he said there's not enough return there, but he had nothing else to offer, and he lost his job. The challenge is to build the infrastructure where this really becomes not just small potatoes, but really seen as the big impact it can have. And cumulatively, the work you've done for 40 years here, raising local produce and organic produce, really has a very big impact that nobody appreciates, and that's part of our job, is to really show that in raw dollars. The third key element of the plan is something I think would be very fruitful to think about here in the Nashville area, is to invest in growing new farmers. I'm going to tell a story that I didn't actually tell the folks in South Carolina yesterday, but it'll make me have more fun speaking. I get the question a lot about how do we grow farmers in the United States. And the thing I'd like to say about that first is it's remarkable to be in the country that feeds the world that doesn't know how to grow new farmers. That's a remarkable question to have to field as an analyst to say, well, how come we don't know that? And the story I like to tell is somehow we managed to get every kid in this country to know how to play baseball or softball. And why do we do that? How do we do that? We invest in Little League fields and neighborhood parks so that people can learn how to play baseball themselves when they're very young. And some of those folks do it because they hope to make hundreds of millions of dollars a year as an athlete, but some do it because that's what their friends are doing. That's what I did. I learned how to play. I've learned how to be a pretty decent pitcher, not for financial reward, but because it was what the culture asked me to do. And we have a whole legion of people who volunteer to be coaches and umpires and to help fuel the process of kids learning how to play baseball. And we have a whole process of helping some of the kids who aspired to playing in high school, playing in college, playing in the minor leagues, playing perhaps in the big leagues and getting really rewarded well. And when it gets to the big leagues and we talk about the process of developing Major League Baseball players, what do we call the system that produces those baseball players? We call it the farm system. And yet when we say, how do we grow new farmers, we say, I don't have a clue how to do that. It could be the same process of basically saying we make it so easy for everybody to learn how to farm that there's no alternative, and that everybody's, in our cultural daily lessons, we're learning how to produce food, how to handle food, how to cook food, how to identify food. And it's so much of our part of our culture we hardly think about it. And if we do that well, sure enough, we'll have people who can farm. My specific strategy for this is based on the experience of a food hub in North Charleston called Grow Food Carolina. Grow Food Carolina was built because a donor basically said, you can have access to a building. The building's about the size of this room we're in today. And he said, I don't need this. You can use it for a food hub. And they had a great 6-year business plan that projected they could be self-sustaining as a business in 6 years. But they needed about $2.5 million of donations to get there because they needed donations to fix up the property, to make it function well for a food hub, to put in some coolers, to have truck areas, loading areas, and so on. But they also are allowed by the owner of the building to rent out the space to have an income stream. They have a very effective business plan, and they think there's enough stream of produce that they can be self-supporting. I talked to them in my interview and I said, what do you need to move forward? And they said, the biggest obstacle the state could help us with is that we have farmers out there who harvest a really wonderful crop when it's 85 degrees out there, and they have no place to take it to get cooled right away. It sits overnight. They have no real way to package it and make it easy for us to pick up. So we end up having to pick it up ourselves and then bring it to our warehouse so we wash it and package it and get it ready for a market. And that takes us time and money we don't really want to have. And we also think we'd have better produce if the farmers had the capacity on the farm. And so that became, in my mind, the question, what web of support do we need to build so the food hub would survive? And I can't tell you how many communities I'm working with, they're trying to launch a food hub without having that web of support in place. And people are literally spending hundreds of thousands of dollars this year doing feasibility studies that prove to them there's not enough produce being grown to support a food hub. Where the question would be, how could we spend that money actually building the production on the front end? The other thing I think that the food hub really taught me is they said, yes, we're a business, but we talked during the interview, and I said, how about if we thought of this as an educational facility that made part of its income stream rather than as a business that was struggling for donations? Because what it's doing is it's teaching farmers how to produce that product for market. It's building connections between farmers and consumers. It's actually doing the infrastructure development that make the connections and create the efficiencies that will make local food more sustainable 10 years down the road. And yet, there's a number of people who say, well, if you're not self-supporting within 6 years, you have failed. And that's just not true. They built incredible capacity, but the problem is how we think about that as a business. I think we're moving much more to where we're appreciating the fact that a business may need subsidy for 6 years. In fact, any new business I can think of needs a subsidy, but some of them are started by people who start out wealthy, and some of them are started out by corporations that have money to finance their own development. But when you're young or not rich and you try to start a business, we say, well, it can't possibly work because you're not rich enough, or you would need some subsidy. We need much more of this hybrid vision where we say some subsidy, as long as it's going towards a sustainable paradigm, is really appropriate. And that's, again, part of the message of the food hub in Carolina. But Charleston has a food hub because they have a really rich restaurant district. They're known, they're a culinary center nationally. They have lots of chefs who want to buy food from local farms. They have 4 growing seasons. They have some farms that can supply that, but they don't have enough supply to keep the business self-sustaining. So how do we build that supply? This is what they asked for, was investment in this kind of capacity at the farm level. And in that conversation, I thought a while and said, what we're really talking about is how do we build the food web in South Carolina? What places, the yellow circles there would be the places where food would be produced. And each of those dots represents a place where some cluster of farms is already organizing to try to create a food supply, but doesn't have enough money. And the green circles represent the food hub in Charleston, but also the vision for food hubs in Florence and Columbia and Greenville, Spartanburg. And I said, let's invest in the nodes that feed the hubs before we try to build more hubs, because we're going to have a lot of food hubs that need subsidy if we don't get the production first. And we have to obviously balance that. So at every step of the way, if we need more hub activity, we can invest in that. But the key is really produce more food and invest in that process in the long haul. So here's a model we had that a design firm in Minneapolis came up with. This is a little hard to see, but basically this is an incubator farm that has 5 5-acre plots around a central packing and storage facility. And guess what? If we built this kind of incubator farm, we'd be showing farmers, giving farmers the opportunity to learn how to collaborate, learning how to share equipment, learning how to kind of create efficiencies for local food trade that are best done by having farms next to each other. And we're seeing an incubator farm not as a project, but as actually an integral part of a food system that's learning how to grow new farmers on a regular basis, year in and year out. The same design firm designed this packing shed. Again, a little hard to see, but this is about a $350,000 packing shed, even if you put up a new pole barn around the inside of the building, which has washing, hydro-cooling. It has storage areas at 3 different temperatures. It has offices for the farms. It has restrooms. It has distribution center, packing shed. $350,000 investment that would help 5 farms in one area. And if you made that investment, you'd have local efficiencies for 40 years to come, because that building would stay in that function. And the farmers might come and go, but the facilities would stay. What you're doing is investing in creating local efficiencies, and if you do this, fuel this with green energy, you actually have a more competitive system than if you're buying food from California and Mexico. And many states have the resources that would allow this to happen. So we suggested a $5 million competitive grant program where people who have a vision like this can come forward and say, this is what we can contribute to the idea. Can you match our money with more money? Can you help us really realize a facility that would create that opportunity locally? What I also love about the food production node idea is that the farmers in this node can then sit down and say, would we prefer to sell our food to schools, or do we want to sell to the food hub? Do we want to sell to our neighbors through a farm stand, or do we want to sell to a food hub? We have actually a choice that way. This also becomes a place where local school kids can go visit during the school year, and they can learn what a commercial kitchen does. They can learn how to process food. It's a place for ongoing education in the community about food. So it really enriches what's going to happen in the classroom. So those are the 3 elements of the plan: elevate the integrity of the brand, market food and health to customers, and then invest in new farm clusters. And then let me just quickly run through some examples from elsewhere. A lot of you know Growing Power. This is their hoop house in Chicago, raising food in an inner city setting for inner city neighbors. Pete Scherf is a farmer in Michigan City, Indiana, just east of Lake Michigan. And he's a businessman who runs a fairly successful meat, it's actually a metal cutting operation that does laser cutting of metal. And he showed me a picture. He said, I got to the point where I'd actually cut the grate for the White House. And I said, there's not much more I want to accomplish with this job. He's a young guy. And he said, I'm actually getting to where the business is not pleasing me the way it used to, and I'm living in a countryside, so I'd like to farm. He spent 3 years doing a business plan, working with his 3 bankers, working with SBA, penciling out his statistics. He's a businessman who knows how to do this well. And what he realized was he could make more money milking 25 cows than milking 150 if he bottled the milk himself and sold it directly to his neighbors. And what he said was, my wife and I talked about this a lot. And he said, we were tired of worrying about whether labor was going to show up. And we wanted a farm where if one of us was sick, the other one could manage it easily in a day. So we said 25 cows is the size we want to be. We have people in our neighborhood that can pay a premium price for that. We can make more money doing that than being big. And we're going to see a lot more examples of that in the future, where people think that going small is more profitable than going large. And the more we create a supportive infrastructure, the more that'll be true. I've worked with a farm near Athens, Georgia, that's a 4-acre farm that's selling upwards of $75,000 an acre of produce, supporting 4 young, energetic, very hardworking folks with a livable wage. And they said the difference between selling $75,000 an acre and $100,000 is all marketing. It's not a problem to produce it. It's a matter of producing it at the time the market wants it, knowing how to package it, knowing how to get the premium value for that, and being in a market that will pay that price. This slide transformed the discussion in South Carolina yesterday because one legislator saw that and said, oh, this might be possible. Because I think in his mind, vegetable people only make $100 or so an acre. And this is helping expand their horizons. A few more examples. Organic sales have been strong across the country in the last few years, and you'll see quite a bit in the Pacific Northwest, in California and New England. But what I really like to point out is Wisconsin, Southwest Wisconsin has become an organic capital of the nation. And this is because people did what Jeff did 40 years ago, and they went out to the countryside and they started raising food organically when nobody cared and there was no support, and they just did it and they did it and did it, and now some of them are making six-figure incomes selling vegetables. But they said we need an aggregation capacity, and Organic Valley focused the attention of dairy farmers in this region. So here's the headquarters of Organic Valley. Unfortunately, they had a big fire that burned down half this building in the spring, but they are hanging on there. A town of 400 where they have a corporate headquarters like this, people driving 2 hours a day to come to work because it's one of the few places to get a really prosperous job in the middle of a fairly low-income area. This is their sales chart. In 1988, Organic Valley was 8 farmers in a living room having this conversation, saying, you know, the economy's not working for any of us, what are we going to do? And after some power struggle, after some differences of opinion, and after some massaging of business models, the folks that said we can find a market with metropolitan people who want to pay premium price for organic food, those folks won that policy discussion. They've taken that to be projecting $1 billion worth of sales in this year. After this will be their 25th year. So compare that with the chart for, say, South Carolina. and what I like about this is it kind of reminds me that by collaborating, you can actually create the economic conditions that the broader economy cannot create, because it's built on greed and competition, and on exporting food long distances, and on making food inert so it can be traveling. This is something that you can do with collaboration. We're not too far from Huntsville today, and I wanted to tell a little bit about a study I did in North Alabama, which I think I highlighted 2 years ago. And this was done for the food bank in Huntsville, which has decided to become one of the national leaders in this whole discussion. And they told me about a real remarkable moment they had where they raised some really difficult corporate money so they could buy vegetables for their customers. They put in an order through Feeding America for some canned peas. And this is what they found. They got canned peas that were produced in China. And the board had this kind of aha moment. They said, we are in the best part of Alabama for raising peas, and we're spending money that's really hard to raise, buying peas that are raised, canned, and shipped from China 11,000 miles away. What is that about? And after much discussion, they said, why don't we support local farmers who want to raise food for our clients? Why don't we have connecting our customers with organic food? Why don't we build a network of local farmers so they know how to find markets? And they are now becoming what they call a food hub. Actually, the first step was to help a guy who's been borrowing backyards from 9 of his neighbors to raise produce in his yard, in his neighborhood. He lives in a low-income community, so automatically when he raises food, that goes to his neighborhood. And they helped him do a little better job of doing that, and they helped him identify a farm market stand that he could sell a little bit more produce. But they also now decided to become a food aggregation center for North Alabama. They aspire now to be the best place in their region to find local produce because they know the growers, and guess what? They have warehouses, they have coolers, they know how to handle food safely, they have all those protocols in stock, and they have the infrastructure to do this. And they said, right now, we don't have enough business to buy another truck dedicated to that purpose, so right now our best role is to broker deals. So we know all the farms, we have a guy whose job it is to go out there and know every farmer and what they're producing. And he tells the buyers what they have access to buy. They have an internet trading platform, and this is their first step. But they want to be the best place to buy food if you're a grocer, if you're a restaurateur, if you're a school that wants to buy from local farms. They say, we can make those deals happen, and we can store the food safely in the meantime, once we get the business flow up. And it's a remarkable shift of the idea of a food hub role. That's been extended by the Tucson Food Bank, which has its own farm, which is a training farm for low-income people to learn how to raise food. And I've showed this slide to some people in the Midwest who say, that doesn't look like very good soil to me, but this is an organic farm in the middle of the city of Tucson, which is a training farm which will build capacity for low-income people to feed themselves. And the plants look pretty happy here, too. Western Wisconsin has this food enterprise center. I think this is the last story they have for the day. This is a story I think is emblematic of what a lot of places will face. This is a 100,000 square foot factory that closed precipitously in 2009. Coincidentally, it happened to close about 3 months after I did a study of the food economy of the area. And after my study, the local leaders said the future of our economy is in food. This is also the center of organic food production in southwest Wisconsin, close to Organic Valley. And when this factory closed, the Economic Development Authority got on the telephone with the CEO that made that decision. And she said, you know, you've been here since 1974. We've supported you for all those years. We've created a good business climate. We've given you incentives. How will you pay us back for taking 85 of our best jobs out of town overnight? The executive stammered for about 20 minutes. He wasn't sure how to handle that question. And finally, he got a little worn down. He said, what do you want me to do? And she said, sell us the building. And he did for a very small price. So the Economic Development Authority now owns a 100,000 square foot building that has been targeted to be a destination center for local food. They've actually succeeded in getting a $2 million grant from the Economic Development Administration nationally to take asbestos out, to open up new lighting, new electricity, better water systems, to make sure it's very safe for food handling. This is their model. They have 2 organic distributors, Keewaydin Organics and Fifth Season, that are trading organic produce both locally and also through the entire Midwest from St. Paul to Chicago, other businesses. And they're networked with hospitals and schools to say, we'll buy 10% of our produce from this factory, from this enterprise center when it's up and running. The local food co-op brings in their list of farmers to help them identify all the farmers that are there. A meat processor across the street that helps them load meat with vegetables and the similar shipments. Organic Valley nearby with technical assistance, and Amish farmers who say, we'll ramp up production so hospitals and schools can get high quality produce, more and more sustainably raised at a low price. This is a community food web formed around what could have been a calamity for the economy in Viroqua, Wisconsin, and they now project that in about 2 years they will replace all 85 jobs are lost with food-related jobs in the organic foods industry in this warehouse and related business. And that kind of turnaround, I think, is going to fuel incredible change in that region. My final points, as I said before, the small farms won't reliably make a good living until we build the infrastructure that supports them, the web of relationships that help small farms survive, that help local food hubs survive. And that is definitely a public function to create that infrastructure. It's also something we get to do with private money, with our own volunteer time as well. But we need knowledge, we need systems, we need wisdom, we need information, we need physical facilities like storage facilities and coolers and all that stuff that really make local food trade efficient. And that's my guess on how we build health, wealth, connection, and capacity in places like Nashville. If you want to find the South Carolina study, this is the URL where you can find that. You can also go to my website, they'll see a link to it there.
Thanks for watching part 2 of the Tennessee Local Food Summit 2013 with Ken Meter. You can find out more about Ken by going to www.crcworks.org. Tune in for more great talks from the Food Summit coming soon to a local access channel near you. Until then, I am your host, Susan Shan, for the show Earth Revolution. Peace, love, recycling, and local food. See you next time.
So let it begin.